The message traveled through space at speeds that defied understanding. Ambassador Kelrick stood in the communications chamber of the Zenthari homeworld, watching the signal pulse outward into the darkness. His translucent skin flickered with colors that spoke of desperation and fading hope. 3 months had passed since the Marauder clans arrived. 3 months of watching his people suffer under occupation, while the Galactic Council debated and discussed and did absolutely nothing. 12 colony worlds had fallen. The defense fleet that the Zenthari had built over centuries was now debris floating in orbital graveyards. The Marauders were not sophisticated enemies. They did not come with complex strategies or advanced technology. They came with numbers and brutality, and an absolute willingness to do what civilized species found unthinkable. They took what they wanted. They enslaved who they wanted. They destroyed what they could not use. Kelrick had spent weeks in the council chambers. He had presented evidence of atrocities. He had shown recordings of civilian massacres. He had begged and pleaded and offered everything his people had left to give. The response was always the same. The Valdari spoke of trade implications. The Nexians worried about territorial disputes. The collective of minds suggested forming a committee to study the situation. Everyone had reasons why intervention was complicated, why it required more discussion, why immediate action was impossible. The truth was simpler and more painful. The council was afraid. The Marauders were numerous and violent. Fighting them would cost lives and resources. It was easier to express sympathy and do nothing. Kelrick understood this now. He had believed in the council once. He had believed that civilization meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. He had been wrong. A junior aide named Torvix approached him after another failed session. The young Zenthari was barely old enough to serve in the diplomatic corps. He carried a data tablet and an expression of barely contained excitement. Torvix had been researching alternatives, options that did not require council approval. He had found something interesting. There was a species at the edge of known space. They called themselves humans or Terrans, depending on who you asked. They had only achieved faster than light travel 40 years ago. By galactic standards, they were newcomers, primitives, barely worth noticing. But Torvix had found something in the restricted files, something that made his skin patterns pulse with a mixture of fear and hope. The human homeworld was classified as a Category 9 death world, the highest possible rating, the kind of planet that most species could not survive on for more than a few hours. High gravity, dangerous weather, aggressive wildlife, toxic plants. Everything about Earth seemed designed to kill its inhabitants. Yet somehow humans had not only survived but thrived. There were other details in the files. Humans were traders and explorers. They were friendly enough in commercial dealings. But there were rumors, stories that council officials dismissed as exaggerations, stories about human mercenaries who fought with a ferocity that terrified even hardened warriors, stories about human ships that could withstand damage that would destroy any other vessel, stories about a species that saw violence not as a last resort, but as a tool to be used when necessary. Kelrick read through the files 3 times. The council would never approve contacting the humans. They were too unpredictable, too dangerous, too willing to act without considering the diplomatic consequences, which was exactly why Kelrick decided to contact them. He had nothing left to lose. His people were dying, his worlds were burning. If the civilized galaxy would not help, perhaps someone uncivilized would. He crafted the message carefully. It contained everything the humans would need to know: the location of the occupied worlds, the strength of the Marauder forces, the suffering of the civilian populations. He did not promise payment. He did not offer trade agreements. He simply asked for help. The message went out on every frequency that Torvix could find associated with human space. Then Kelrick waited. The response came 18 hours later. A single word in standard galactic language appeared on his display screen. Received. That was all. No questions, no demands, no negotiations. Just acknowledgement that someone had heard his plea. Kelrick felt his patterns shift to colors he had not displayed in months. Hope was a dangerous thing. It could sustain you or destroy you. But it was better than the alternative. The council found out about the message within days. They summoned Kelrick to explain himself. He stood before the assembled delegates and told them the truth. He had contacted the humans because every other option had failed. Because talking and debating and considering had accomplished nothing while his people suffered. because someone needed to act. The council was outraged. They declared his actions unauthorized. They threatened to expel the Zenthari from the Alliance. They demanded he recall the message immediately. Kelric refused. What could they do to him that the Marauders had not already done to his people? The council could not help. They could not hurt him any worse than he was already hurt. So he waited and hoped and prayed to gods he was not sure he believed in anymore. 5 days after the initial response, another message arrived. This one was longer. It contained coordinates for a meeting point at the edge of Zenthari space. It contained a timeline. It contained a promise written in simple words that somehow carried absolute conviction. Help is coming. Kelric traveled to the meeting coordinates in a small diplomatic shuttle. He went alone because he did not want to endanger anyone else. The council had made it clear that any contact with the humans was unauthorized and potentially dangerous. If this went wrong, Kelric wanted to be the only one who paid the price. He reached the coordinates and waited. His sensors showed nothing but empty space. Then reality seemed to tear open as ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. Not one ship, not a small squadron. 37 warships materialized in perfect formation. Each vessel was larger than anything in the Zenthari fleet had been. They bore markings that Kelric recognized from the files, the insignia of the Terran Defense Coalition. The ships held position as a single shuttle detached and approached. Kelric opened a communication channel. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. The humans responded with calm efficiency. They invited him aboard their flagship. The vessel was called Vengeance. The name seemed appropriate. Kelric docked his shuttle in a bay that could have held 50 vessels his size. The artificial gravity hit him as soon as he stepped out. It was 40% higher than standard. He felt his body straining under the weight. The air was thick with oxygen. The lighting was dim by his standards. Everything about the environment spoke of a species adapted to harsh conditions. 2 humans waited to escort him. They were tall and heavily muscled, and moved with a fluid grace that suggested perfect control over their powerful bodies. They led him through corridors filled with activity. Human crew members worked at stations with focused intensity. Their technology was different from what Kelric knew. More robust, more direct, less elegant but somehow more effective. They brought him to an operations center where holographic displays showed detailed maps of the occupied Zenthari worlds. Every Marauder position was marked. Every defensive installation was identified. The humans had already gathered more intelligence than the Zenthari military had managed in 3 months. A woman stood at the center of the organized chaos. She wore a uniform that marked her as someone of high rank. Her hair was iron gray. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds. When she turned to face Kelric, he saw something in her expression that the council delegates had never shown. Certainty. She introduced herself as Admiral Catherine Drake, commander of the fleet. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She asked Kelric direct questions about the situation, about the Marauders, about the civilians, about what he needed. Kelric tried to explain about payment, about trade agreements, about the political complications. Drake held up a hand to stop him. Her voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. We did not come here to negotiate terms. We came because slavers prey on the innocent, and that cannot stand. Not in your space. Not in ours. Not anywhere. You asked for help. We are here to provide it. The only question is whether you trust us to do what needs to be done. Kelric looked at the displays showing his occupied worlds. He thought about his people suffering under Marauder control. He thought about the Council's empty promises and endless debates. Then he looked at Admiral Drake and saw something he had not seen in months. Someone who was ready to act. Someone who understood that some situations required force rather than words. Someone who cared more about results than procedures. He gave his answer. Yes, I trust you. Do what needs to be done. Drake nodded once. Then we begin in 6 hours. I suggest you stay aboard and watch. You should see what happens when Deathworlders go to war. The operations center of the Vengeance hummed with controlled activity. Kelric watched from an observation platform as human officers coordinated preparations for an assault that would begin in less than 6 hours. Every movement was purposeful. Every order was precise. There was no panic, no uncertainty. These people had done this before. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Commander Jake Morrison approached the platform. He was Admiral Drake's second in command. His uniform bore marks of long service and his eyes held the weariness of someone who had seen too much combat. He offered Kelrick a data tablet containing the operational plan. The detail was staggering. The humans had identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in the Marauder defenses. They had calculated optimal approach vectors for each occupied world. They had planned contingencies for dozens of possible complications. This was not a rescue mission thrown together in desperation. This was a military operation executed with surgical precision. Morrison explained the plan in simple terms. The fleet would split into multiple task forces. Each force would target a different occupied world simultaneously. The Marauders would not have time to coordinate a defense or threaten hostages. The attacks would be swift and overwhelming. The goal was complete liberation within 24 hours. Kelrick felt his skin patterns shift to colors of disbelief. 24 hours? The Zenthari military had estimated it would take months to retake even one world. Morrison's expression did not change. We do not have months. Your people do not have months. So we will do it in a day. A young woman in a lieutenant's uniform joined them. Sarah Chen was the fleet intelligence officer. She was smaller than most of the other humans Kelrick had seen, but she carried herself with the same quiet confidence. Chen had been responsible for gathering the intelligence that made this operation possible. She had analyzed Marauder communication patterns. She had identified their command structure. She had found their weaknesses. Now she walked Kelrick through each phase of the assault. Her voice was calm as she described tactics that would have horrified council strategists. The humans were not interested in minimal force or proportional response. They were interested in ending the threat permanently. Admiral Drake called the senior officers to a final briefing. Kelrick was permitted to observe. The Admiral stood before a holographic display showing all 12 occupied worlds. She did not give a rousing speech. She did not appeal to honor or glory. She simply stated the mission parameters. 12 worlds. Billions of civilians under occupation. Enemy forces willing to use human shields. The objective was liberation with minimal civilian casualties. The method was overwhelming force applied with precision. Any questions were answered quickly and directly. Then Drake dismissed them with a single command. Execute the plan. The fleet began to move. Ships that had been holding formation broke into smaller groups. Each task force oriented toward its assigned target. Kelrick watched the display screens as the massive vessels accelerated to speeds that seemed impossible for their size. Human engineering was different from anything he had encountered. Their ships were built to withstand punishment. Every system had redundancies. Every weakness had been reinforced. They did not build elegant vessels that relied on shields and evasion. They built fortresses that could take damage and keep fighting. The first task force reached its target world 4 hours later. Kelrick watched the tactical feed from the operations center. The Marauders had fortified the orbital space around the planet with defense platforms. Standard doctrine said those platforms would take days to neutralize. The humans destroyed them in 17 minutes. Strike fighters launched from the carrier vessels. The small craft were piloted by humans who had trained in Earth's crushing gravity and chaotic atmosphere. Their reflexes were faster than any other species could match. They danced through defensive fire with impossible grace. Each attack run was perfect. Each target was eliminated. The platforms fell one by one until the orbital space was clear. Captain Ryan Hughes led the fighter wing. His voice came over the communication channels with calm efficiency as he directed his pilots. The humans did not waste ammunition or effort. Every shot had a purpose. Every maneuver was calculated. They were not reckless. They were ruthlessly effective. Morrison pointed out details that Kelrick would have missed. The fighters were avoiding civilian structures. They were targeting only military installations. Even in the chaos of combat, the humans maintained precise control. They killed without hesitation, but they killed with discrimination. The Marauder fleet scrambled to respond. They had numerical superiority. They had been confident in their defensive positions. They had controlled these worlds for 3 months without serious challenge. That confidence died quickly. Human warships engaged the Marauder vessels with weapons that operated at power levels the Zenthari had never seen. Energy beams that could punch through heavy armor. Kinetic projectiles that struck with the force of small asteroids. Missile salvos that overwhelmed point defense systems through sheer volume. The Marauders fought back desperately, but they were outclassed in every category that mattered. Kelrick watched as a Marauder heavy cruiser attempted to ram a human destroyer. The collision should have crippled both vessels. The destroyer's armor held. The cruiser crumpled. The destroyer fired its engines and continued toward its next target without even slowing. Morrison noticed Kelrick's expression of shock. Human ships are designed for worst-case scenarios. We build them assuming shields will fail and armor will be breached. Everything is reinforced. Everything is redundant. Our vessels can survive conditions that would destroy any other ship in the galaxy. It is not elegant, but it works. The battle continued across all 12 worlds simultaneously. Each task force adapted to local conditions with impressive speed. When the Marauders tried to use hostages as leverage, the humans did not hesitate. Admiral Drake transmitted a message on all frequencies. Her words were simple and carried absolute conviction. Harm a single civilian and we will hunt every last one of you to the ends of the galaxy. Surrender now and you will be tried fairly. Continue fighting and you will be eliminated. You have 5 minutes to decide. The deadline was not negotiable. The threat was not empty. 4.5 minutes later, the Marauder commander on one of the occupied worlds ordered the execution of 50 hostages. He transmitted the order on open channels, believing it would force the humans to back down. He was wrong. The response was immediate and devastating. The human ships in orbit identified the exact location of the transmission. Marine boarding parties launched within seconds. The assault craft punched through atmospheric defenses and landed directly on the Marauder command center. Armed soldiers in powered armor breached the facility before the executions could be carried out. Major Alex Price led the boarding team. His voice remained calm even as his soldiers fought through desperate resistance. The Marauders had numbers and defensive positions. The humans had superior equipment and ruthless training. Every room was cleared with brutal efficiency. Every enemy was neutralized with professional precision. Price reached the hostage-holding area moments before the scheduled executions. The Marauder guards surrendered immediately when they saw the human soldiers. They had heard stories. They knew what happened to people who fought Deathworlders. The 50 hostages were escorted to safety. The Marauder commander was taken into custody. Price transmitted a report to Admiral Drake. All hostages secured. 0 casualties. Kelrick watched the Admiral nod with satisfaction. That single action changed the entire dynamic of the battle. The other Marauder commanders received a clear message. The humans would not negotiate with threats. They would not be intimidated by hostage situations. They would simply come and take their people back. Any attempt to harm civilians would be met with overwhelming force and 0 mercy. The Marauder resistance collapsed within the next 6 hours. Some vessels attempted to flee. Human fighters pursued them beyond the system boundaries and disabled their engines. Some ground forces tried to hide among civilian populations. Human intelligence assets tracked them down with terrifying accuracy. A few commanders attempted last stands that accomplished nothing except getting their own people killed. By the time 18 hours had passed since the first attack, all 12 worlds were secured. The Marauder forces were destroyed or captured. Not a single human ship had been lost. Casualties were minimal. The operation had been executed exactly as planned. Kelrick stood in the operations center and watched the status boards turn green one by one. Each indicator represented a world freed from occupation. Billions of his people were no longer slaves. The impossible had been accomplished in less than a day. He felt his patterns shift through colors he could not name. Relief, gratitude, amazement, something else he could not quite identify. Admiral Drake approached him. Her expression had not changed throughout the entire operation. She had remained calm and focused from beginning to end. Now she offered him a simple statement of fact. Your worlds are free. Your people are safe. The Marauders will face justice. This is what we came to do. Kelrick wanted to thank her. He wanted to express his gratitude in words that might somehow convey what. News of the liberation spread through the galaxy at the speed of faster-than-light communication. The Galactic Council received reports that seemed impossible. 12 worlds freed in less than 24 hours. A Marauder force that had terrorized the sector for months destroyed or captured with minimal casualties. All accomplished by a species that most council members had barely heard of. The initial reaction was disbelief. Surely the reports were exaggerated. Surely someone had made an error in the translation. No single fleet could accomplish what the humans claimed to have done. Then the evidence began arriving. Sensor logs from Zenthari observation posts. testimony from freed civilians, recordings from marauder ships captured intact. All of it confirmed the impossible truth. The humans had done exactly what they said they would do. They had brought a fleet. They had engaged an entrenched enemy. They had won decisively. The council chambers erupted in arguments that lasted for days. Some delegates praised the swift action. Others condemned it as dangerous vigilantism. Many simply sat in shocked silence, trying to understand what had just happened. High Chancellor Vortis demanded answers. He was a Nexian who had served on the council for 3 decades. He had built his career on careful diplomacy and calculated risk management. The human action represented everything he opposed: unilateral military intervention without authorization, complete disregard for established protocols, the use of overwhelming force when negotiation might have been possible. He summoned Ambassador Kelrick to explain himself. The hearing was meant to be private, but word leaked and the chamber was packed with observers from dozens of species. Kelrick stood before the council and told his story without embellishment. He had asked for help. The council had debated. His people had continued to suffer. He had contacted the humans because he had no other choice. They had responded. They had acted. They had succeeded. He presented detailed casualty reports. 0 civilian deaths caused by human action. Minimal combat casualties despite fierce resistance. Thousands of slaves freed. Billions of beings liberated. The numbers spoke for themselves. Vortis tried to dismiss the results as irrelevant. The process mattered more than the outcome. Kelrick responded with words that would be quoted across the galaxy for years to come. Tell that to the mother who would have watched her children executed if the humans had waited for your approval. Tell that to the elderly who died in labor camps while you formed committees. Tell that to the millions who suffered under occupation while you debated proper procedures. The humans did not follow your protocols because your protocols do not save lives. They only provide cover for those who are too afraid to act. The chamber fell silent. No one had ever spoken to the Chancellor that way. Vortis demanded that the humans answer for their unauthorized intervention. Kelrick smiled without humor. They are already here. Perhaps you should ask them yourself. Admiral Drake arrived at the council station 3 days later. She came with minimal escort. Commander Morrison and Lieutenant Chen accompanied her. They did not bring guards or weapons. They walked through the council chambers with the quiet confidence of people who had nothing to prove. Delegates whispered as they passed. These were the Deathworlders everyone had been talking about. They looked almost ordinary, tall and muscular certainly, but not the monsters some had imagined, until you looked at their eyes. Then you saw something that made even hardened warriors uncomfortable. These people knew violence intimately. They understood it. They were not afraid of it. That made them more dangerous than any weapon. The formal hearing took place in the council's main chamber. Drake stood at the center of a circular room surrounded by delegates from 60 different species. Chancellor Vortis opened with accusations of unauthorized military action. Drake listened without interruption. When he finished, she responded with calm directness. You are correct. We did not seek authorization. We did not ask permission. We saw beings in need and we had the capability to help, so we helped. That is all. Vortis demanded to know by what right the humans presumed to enforce justice in council space. Drake's expression did not change. By the same right that any sentient being has when they witness injustice. The right of conscience. The duty of capability. Lieutenant Chen stepped forward and began presenting data on holographic displays that filled the chamber. She showed council records going back 10 years. 17 different systems had suffered attacks by pirates and slavers. The council had responded with diplomatic missions and trade sanctions. The attacks had continued. The slavers had operated with impunity because the council would not take direct action. Chen highlighted the casualties. Billions enslaved, trillions in stolen resources, countless lives destroyed while the council talked. Her voice remained professional, but her words cut deep. You had the power to stop this. You chose not to. We had the power to stop this. We chose to act. That is the only difference between us. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some delegates tried to justify the council's inaction. Others demanded stronger responses in the future. A few had the courage to admit that Chen was right. The council had failed in its most basic duty to protect the innocent. Vortis attempted to regain control. He demanded that the humans submit to council authority or face expulsion from civilized space. Morrison spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber. "We do not seek membership in your council. We do not require your approval. We will continue to respond when people ask for help. You may accept that or oppose it. The choice is yours. But understand that we will not stop doing what is right simply because you find it inconvenient." A delegate from the Valdari Compact asked the question that many were thinking. What happens when your definition of right conflicts with ours? What happens when your intervention causes more harm than good? Drake considered the question seriously. That is a fair concern. We are not perfect. We may make mistakes, but we would rather act and risk error than stand idle and guarantee suffering. We will answer for our actions. We will face consequences if we cause harm, but we will not apologize for saving lives. The delegate had no response to that. An unexpected voice spoke from the observer gallery. Dr. Lisa Grant had accompanied the fleet as chief medical officer. She had spent the days after liberation treating freed slaves. Now she stood and addressed the council with barely controlled anger. "I have spent my career saving lives. I took an oath to do no harm. I have honored that oath. But I have also learned that sometimes doing no harm means taking action against those who cause harm. I treated beings who were tortured, starved, worked to death. Some were children. Your protocols did not save them. Your negotiations did not free them, we did. Perhaps you should consider which matters more to you. Your pride or their lives." The chamber fell silent again. Grant's words had struck at the heart of the issue. The council had allowed atrocities to continue because stopping them would have been difficult and politically complicated. The humans had stopped them because it was the right thing to do regardless of complications. Morrison presented the final piece of evidence. The captured marauder leadership. They were being held on human ships pending trial. Every action taken during the liberation had been recorded. Every decision was documented. The humans were not hiding anything. They had nothing to hide. They had acted with overwhelming force, but also with precision and restraint. Not a single war crime had been committed. Not a single civilian had been harmed by human action. Chancellor Vortis tried one final argument. The humans had set a dangerous precedent. If every species decided to take unilateral action, the Council's authority would collapse. Chaos would reign. Drake nodded slowly. "You may be right. Perhaps we have destabilized your carefully balanced system, but that system was allowing millions to suffer. If maintaining your authority requires accepting that suffering, then perhaps your authority deserves to collapse." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Some delegates looked angry. Others looked thoughtful. Many looked ashamed. The hearing ended without resolution. The council could not agree on how to respond to the human intervention. Some wanted sanctions. Some wanted cooperation. Most wanted time to consider the implications. Drake and her officers left the chamber without waiting for permission. They had said what needed to be said. The council could accept it or reject it. Either way, humanity would continue to do what it believed was right. Kelrick watched them leave and felt something shift in his understanding of galactic politics. Power meant nothing without the will to use it. The council had power but lacked will. The humans had both. That made all the difference. As news of the hearing spread, something unexpected happened across the galaxy. Other species that had suffered under pirate attacks began sending messages to human space. Not official requests through diplomatic channels. Private pleas from desperate people who had exhausted all other options. The messages all said essentially the same thing. "The Council will not help us, will you?" Admiral Drake read the messages on the bridge of the Vengeance. Morrison stood beside her. The commander's expression was troubled. "We cannot respond to every crisis. We do not have infinite resources." Drake agreed, but her voice carried determination. "No, but we can respond to some." And 3 months passed, and the galaxy continued to change in ways both subtle and profound. The Terran Defense Coalition maintained a presence in Council space, with rotating task forces stationed at strategic locations. Admiral Drake had returned to Earth to brief the civilian government, but Commander Morrison remained in command of the forward-deployed fleet. His orders were simple: respond to legitimate threats against civilian populations, document everything, answer for all actions taken. The humans were not hiding from accountability. They were demonstrating that power could be exercised with restraint and still be effective. Lieutenant Chen had been promoted to full commander. and now served as the primary liaison between the human fleet and the various species in the region. She operated from a small diplomatic station established at the edge of Council space. The station was deliberately modest. No grand architecture, no impressive displays of wealth or technology. Just a functional facility where people could come to request help or register complaints. Chen reviewed dozens of requests every day. Most were legitimate pleas from populations suffering under pirate attacks or criminal enterprises. Some were attempts to manipulate the humans into serving political agendas. Chen had become expert at distinguishing between the two. The second intervention came 6 weeks after the Zenthari liberation. A mining colony on the edge of Valdari space sent a distress signal. Raiders had attacked and were holding the miners hostage while stripping the facility of valuable equipment. The Valdari government asked the council for assistance. The council scheduled an emergency session to discuss possible responses. That session was still ongoing 3 days later, when the Human Rapid Response Wing arrived at the colony. Captain Ryan Hughes led the operation personally. His fighters engaged the raider ships while Marine teams secured the hostages. The entire operation lasted 4 hours. Not a single miner was harmed. The raiders were captured or driven off. The Valdari government issued a formal protest about unauthorized intervention. Then they quietly thanked Commander Chen and asked if the humans could establish a permanent patrol in the region. The third intervention was messier. A conflict between two species over resource rights had escalated into armed confrontation. Both sides claimed the humans had no jurisdiction. Both sides also sent secret messages asking for human support. Morrison refused to take sides in what was essentially a civil dispute. Instead, he positioned his ships between the two forces and declared a demilitarized zone. Any vessel entering the zone would be disabled. Any weapon fired across the zone would be destroyed. Both species threatened to attack the human ships if they did not withdraw. Morrison did not withdraw. He also did not attack. He simply maintained position and waited. After 2 days of standoff, both species agreed to arbitration. The conflict was resolved through negotiation rather than bloodshed. Neither side thanked the humans. Neither side attacked them either. Not everyone appreciated the human presence. The Nexian Empire in particular viewed the humans as dangerous upstarts who threatened the established order. The Nexians had been among the Council's founding members and had significant influence over galactic politics. They believed strongly in hierarchy and proper procedure. The human approach represented everything they opposed. High Chancellor Vortis himself was Nexian and had been leading the opposition to human intervention. He gathered support from several other species who shared concerns about human methods. Together they drafted a formal ultimatum. The humans must submit to Council authority or be expelled from civilized space. All human vessels must leave the region within 30 days. Any future intervention would be treated as an act of war. The ultimatum was delivered to Commander Chen at her diplomatic station. She read it carefully without showing emotion. Then she requested a closed session with the full council to deliver humanity's response. The session was scheduled for the following week. During that week, Chen did something that surprised many observers. She compiled every piece of documentation from every human intervention: sensor logs, combat recordings, after-action reports, medical assessments, testimony from freed civilians. She organized it all into a comprehensive database and made it publicly available. Any being in the galaxy could access the information and judge human actions for themselves. The transparency was unprecedented. Most military forces kept such information classified. The humans were showing everything they had done and inviting scrutiny. The closed session began with Chancellor Vortis reading the ultimatum formally. Chen listened without interruption. When he finished, she activated holographic displays that filled the chamber. The first display showed statistics. In 3 months, human forces had responded to 7 major incidents and 14 minor ones. They had freed over 2,000 civilians from various forms of captivity. They had prevented 3 massacres. They had resolved 2 conflicts without firing a shot. Total civilian casualties caused by human action across all interventions: 0. Total civilian casualties prevented by human intervention, estimated at over 5,000. The numbers were stark and undeniable. The second display showed a comparison. Chen had compiled data on council responses to similar incidents over the past 5 years. Response times measured in weeks or months rather than hours, success rates barely above 50%. Civilian casualties often higher than necessary, because council forces prioritized minimal risk to their own personnel. Chen did not editorialize. She simply presented the numbers and let them speak. The contrast was devastating. When the council acted at all, they acted slowly and cautiously. When humans acted, they acted quickly and decisively. The results reflected that difference. The third display addressed the accusation of vigilantism. Chen showed the legal framework under which the humans operated. Every intervention was justified under galactic law regarding humanitarian assistance. Every action was proportional to the threat faced. Every prisoner was treated according to established conventions. The humans were not operating outside the law. They were operating within a legal framework that the council itself had established but rarely enforced. Chen's voice remained calm and professional. You accuse us of unauthorized intervention. We are acting under authorization that already exists in your own statutes. You simply lack the will to use it. Chancellor Vortis objected. The statutes Chen cited were meant for extreme emergencies only. They required council approval before implementation. Chen nodded. Yes. They require approval from a body that takes weeks to reach decisions while people die. We have eliminated the delay. We have not eliminated the accountability. Every action we take is documented and available for review. If we violate the law, prosecute us. If we cause unjustified harm, sanction us. But do not demand that we stand idle while atrocities occur simply because your approval process is too slow to save lives. A Valdari delegate spoke up. He was one of the species whose colony the humans had saved. His government had officially protested the intervention. Now he said what many were thinking. My government objects to human methods because we must maintain appearances. But privately we are grateful. Our people are alive because the humans acted when we could not. I suspect many others in this chamber feel the same. We condemn publicly what we appreciate privately. Perhaps it is time we were honest about that contradiction. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. No one contradicted him. Chen presented one final piece of evidence. The requests for assistance that continued to arrive at her station. She displayed a sample of messages. All came from beings who had exhausted official channels. All described situations where the council had failed to act. All asked the same thing. Will you help when others will not? Chen looked directly at Chancellor Vortis. You want us to leave. These people want us to stay. You want us to submit to your authority. These people want us to exercise our capability. You represent governments and institutions. We represent something simpler. The idea that those who can help should help. You may find that principle threatening to your authority. We find your authority meaningless if it does not serve that principle. The chamber erupted in argument. Delegates who had supported the ultimatum found themselves defending positions that sounded increasingly hollow. How could they demand the humans leave when the humans had accomplished more good in 3 months than the council had in years? How could they insist on authorization procedures when those procedures consistently failed to save lives? The debate raged for hours. Chen sat quietly and let them argue. She had made her case. The evidence spoke for itself. Eventually, the arguing subsided into uncomfortable silence. Chancellor Vortis called for a vote on the ultimatum. He needed a 2/3 majority to enforce expulsion. The vote began. As each delegate registered their position, it became clear that the ultimatum would fail. 17 delegates abstained. They could not support the humans but would not vote to expel them. 12 voted against the ultimatum outright. They had seen enough to believe that human presence, while uncomfortable, was beneficial. The ultimatum collapsed. Vortis tried to maintain dignity in defeat. He declared the matter tabled for future consideration. Everyone understood what that meant. The council would not oppose the humans directly. They would simply try to 1 year after the liberation of the Zenthari worlds, the galaxy had settled into a new reality. The human presence was no longer shocking or controversial. It had become expected. When pirates attacked a trade convoy, the victims would immediately transmit distress signals on frequencies monitored by human forces. When slavers raided frontier colonies, survivors would ask for human assistance before even contacting their own governments. The phrase that had started as desperate hope had become a promise that the galaxy relied upon. Help is coming, and the humans always came. Admiral Catherine Drake had returned to active command after months of political meetings on Earth. The civilian government, had spent considerable time debating the proper role for humanity in galactic affairs. Some argued for isolation. Others wanted formal council membership. Drake had recommended a middle path. Maintain the rapid response capability, continue humanitarian interventions, but also work to improve the systems that had failed so badly. The government agreed and gave her expanded authority to pursue that goal. Now she stood on the bridge of the vengeance once more and felt something she had not felt in years. Optimism that lasting change was possible. Commander Morrison had been promoted to Commodore and given command of the Second Fleet. This new formation was dedicated entirely to training and cooperation with other species. Morrison had discovered he had a talent for teaching. He could break down complex tactical concepts into simple principles that any species could understand. His students included officers from 17 different governments. They came to learn human methods. What they learned instead was human philosophy. Success in combat came from preparation and discipline. Success in peacekeeping came from credibility and restraint. The combination made military force effective as both weapon and deterrent. Commander Sarah Chen remained at her diplomatic station, but her role had expanded significantly. She now coordinated not just human operations, but a growing network of species who had adopted similar rapid response protocols. The Valdari had established their own quick reaction force. The Zenthari were rebuilding their military along human organizational principles. Even some council members had quietly requested Chen's advice on improving their emergency response capabilities. She provided that advice freely. The goal was not to make everyone dependent on human intervention. The goal was to make human intervention unnecessary by ensuring others could handle their own problems. Captain Ryan Hughes had become something of a legend among fighter pilots across the galaxy. His tactics were studied at military academies on dozens of worlds. His combat recordings were analyzed by strategists trying to understand how humans achieved such overwhelming success in engagement after engagement. Hughes downplayed his own role. He insisted that human success came from training and teamwork, rather than individual heroics, but those who flew with him knew better. There was something about the way humans approached combat that went beyond tactics or technology. They had an instinct for violence that came from evolving on a world that constantly tried to kill them. That instinct made them supernaturally effective in battle. Major Alex Price, now Lieutenant Colonel, commanded the Marine Expeditionary Force that specialized in hostage rescue and high-risk operations. His teams had successfully completed over 30 missions without a single hostage casualty. The success rate was unprecedented. Other species had tried to replicate human methods but found them difficult to execute. The combination of heavy equipment, aggressive tactics, and split-second decision-making required a level of physical and mental capability that few species possessed. Price had begun adapting human methods to work within the limitations of other species. The modified tactics were less spectacular but more practical for general use. His goal was to make effective hostage rescue possible for any competent force. Dr. Lisa Grant had established medical exchange programs that had saved countless lives. Human trauma medicine was decades ahead of galactic standards because Earth's environment produced so many ways to injure yourself. What humans had learned treating accident victims and combat casualties could be applied to any species. Grant had trained over 200 alien physicians in advanced emergency procedures. Those physicians had returned to their homeworlds and begun training others. The ripple effect was already apparent in reduced mortality rates across multiple species. Grant considered it her most important accomplishment. Military force could stop immediate threats. Medical knowledge could improve lives for generations. Ambassador Kelrick had become one of the most influential voices in the Galactic Council. He no longer pleaded or begged. He spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had seen what was possible when political will matched capability. He pushed constantly for reform, faster response times to emergencies, better coordination between council forces, more aggressive action against pirates and slavers. He met resistance from those who preferred the old ways, but he also had allies now. Species who had been saved by human intervention, officials who had been embarrassed by human effectiveness, beings who simply believed that the galaxy could do better than it had been doing. The coalition grew stronger with each passing month. The transformation was not universally welcomed. There were species who saw human influence as a threat to their interests. Criminal enterprises that had operated freely now found themselves hunted. Governments that had ignored problems suddenly faced pressure to address them. Some of this resistance was principled disagreement about proper use of force. Much of it was simple self-interest from those who benefited from the old system. The humans did not try to win over their opponents. They simply continued doing what they had come to do. Respond when asked. Protect the innocent. Hold themselves accountable for their actions. Over time, results spoke louder than rhetoric. Admiral Drake sat in her command chair and reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Another distress signal had come in from a mining operation in the outer reaches. Raiders were attacking and had taken hostages. The situation was depressingly familiar. Morrison appeared on her screen from the Second Fleet. He had received the same report. His voice carried a question. Do we respond? Drake considered. The mining operation was outside council space. No government had jurisdiction. No treaty-obligated intervention. By every legal standard, this was not their problem. She thought about the miners who were counting on someone to answer their call. She thought about the year of missions that had proven human capability. She thought about the promise that had become humanity's reputation. Yes. We respond. How long to reach them? Morrison checked his tactical display. 20 hours at maximum burn for my nearest task force. Drake nodded. Then do not waste time. All ships prepare for combat operations. Transmit the standard message to the raiders. She did not need to specify what that message said. It had become routine over dozens of interventions. You have one chance to surrender peacefully. Release your hostages unharmed, and you will be treated fairly. Resist and you will be eliminated. You have 5 minutes to decide. The message was always the same. The response was usually the same. Some raiders surrendered. Most tried to fight. None succeeded. The Vengeance accelerated toward the crisis along with her escort vessels. Drake used the travel time to coordinate with Chen on diplomatic aspects and with Grant on medical preparation. Every intervention followed the same careful pattern. Overwhelming force applied with precision. Minimal casualties to all parties when possible. Immediate humanitarian assistance after combat ended. Complete documentation of all actions taken. The process had been refined over dozens of missions until it operated with clockwork efficiency. The humans did not improvise. They executed proven procedures. That consistency made them reliable. Reliability made them trustworthy. Trust made them effective. Hughes and his fighter wing launched first when they reached the mining station. The raiders had fortified their position and were using the hostages as shields. Standard tactics that had worked against less capable opponents. They did not work against humans. The fighters engaged the raider ships while Price's Marines breached the station from 3 different vectors. The raiders never had a chance to make good on their threats. Within 90 minutes, all hostages were secured. The raider leadership was in custody. Medical teams were treating minor injuries. The operation had gone exactly according to plan. Drake transmitted her report to Chen and added a note. 20th successful intervention with 0 hostage casualties. The streak continues. As the fleet prepared to depart, Drake received an unexpected message. It came from Chancellor Vortis. The message was brief and formal but carried implications that surprised her. The Council wished to discuss establishing formal cooperation protocols with the human rapid response forces. They were prepared to offer resources and logistical support. They wanted to learn from human methods with the goal of improving Council capabilities. It was not an apology for past opposition. It was not an admission that the humans had been right. It was simply a pragmatic recognition that what the humans were doing worked and the Council needed to adapt. Drake smiled slightly. It was a start. She called Morrison and Chen to discuss the offer. All 3 agreed that cooperation was worth pursuing if it